Vodacom, South Africa's leading mobile network, reported a 1.7% increase in third quarter revenue as it boosted the number of active customers to 51 million. Joining us now for a closer look at the numbers is Duncan McLeod. He's an editor at techcentral.co.za. Duncan, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, those are the headline numbers, and the market certainly not seeming to be impressed by them. The share price down close enough to 6% halfway through today's trading session. Your impression of the headline numbers that have filtered through?
Sure, I think it's really once again a tale of two separate stories here. There's the voice story, the traditional voice business of Vodacom, which has propelled it for the last 20 years since it was first licensed, and then there's the data business, which is the growth business for Vodacom going forward. And what we're seeing in the voice business is it's really maturing. In fact, to the extent now we're starting to see a decline in the voice business. I think driven by the fact that the market's mature. It's a function of the poor economy as well, but I think it's also a factor of the fact that that the market is becoming more competitive. Certainly in the last 12 months, we've seen Cell C become much more aggressive in its pricing. It's introduced this 99 cent per minute on per second billing plans, and we've seen Vodacom react to that and to Cell C's cheaper international rates. So I think we're seeing a lot of pressure on the voice side of things. On the data side of things, I think Vodacom has been more successful in keeping its margins there. We saw an average decrease in the price of data per megabyte of 13.5%. I think we've seen more aggressive price cuts on the fixed line side of things. There may be more pressure there on that side this year, but certainly the strong growth in demand for data, I think it was up around 30%, certainly helped offset the 13% decline in prices. So it's really a story of strong data growth. The international operations are continuing to perform well, but the South African operation is definitely mature on the voice side, and competition is starting to bite.
Duncan, you've summed it up very well. I mean, our previous guest, Chris Gilmore from Absa Investments, said these numbers don't look too bad to me with that growth in data, and data is the future, of course. But I think you hit the nail on the head there in its competition. And Vodacom has been dominant in the South African market. The South African market, on the face of it anyway, not saturated, but has become mature, and the migration or the evolving to a data customer from a voice customer might take a little bit longer than many people have expected. But the market has punished this share, and maybe it's punishing it as well because of its perceived lack of ambition in the overseas markets.
Well, I think the international markets are continuing to perform well, and I think one of the bright points in these results is the strong performance of M-Pesa, particularly in the Tanzanian market. M-Pesa, of course, is the mobile payments system that was pioneered up in the Kenyan market, and that's done really well in Tanzania. I think the market is probably most disappointed about the performance we're seeing in the South African market, particularly on the voice side, and I think concerns particularly around possible margin pressure. I think we're going to see an acceleration in the reduction of mobile broadband data prices this year. I think they perhaps didn't come down as much in 2012 as some people had anticipated. But I think it's really a South African story that's behind the share price movement, and the fact that we're seeing increasing sniping perhaps between Vodacom and Cell C. Interestingly, MTN doesn't seem to feature too much in these running battles. But certainly we saw in the weekend newspapers, we saw Cell C introducing this new supercharge promotion, giving away free airtime free on-net calls. The more you top up as a prepaid customer, the more free on-net calls you get. And Vodacom very clearly in the Sunday newspapers made it clear that they're going to be introducing a similar product in reaction to Cell C's supercharge promotion, and they're going to be introducing that on the 10th of February. So certainly things are starting to hot up in the space, and this could potentially mean margin pressure for Vodacom going forward, which I think may be playing into the share price performance we're seeing today.
It's within that context as well that you've got Vodacom really keeping its eye out for inefficiencies in the business. I mean, they've highlighted the fact that they've taken action to reduce unprofitable calling card one SIMs. I mean, what exactly are we looking at there? Because many saying that this is the right move to have taken to ensure profitability down the line, although it has temporarily impacted revenue growth.
Yes, my understanding of these calling card SIMs that have been, or starter packs that have been discontinued, was that they were introduced about a year or 18 months ago with the intent, with the hope, Vodacom's hope, that they would lead to churn towards Vodacom. What they were basically discounted SIM cards with preloaded airtime. Now what happened was consumers would come from the other networks, they would buy these starter packs, they would use up the discounted airtime, and they'd go back to the networks they were using previously. So they weren't seeing that churn towards Vodacom. So they took a call. So in effect, they were losing money on the sale of these.
Why so ineffective? I mean, what does that say about the South African consumer?
I don't know what it says about South African consumer necessarily. I think it may reflect the tariffing options. You know, I think in that prepaid market where this product was aimed, the sort of mass prepaid market, I think the market is very sensitive and very aware of tariffs and are quite prepared to move between networks. So I think it may have been more to do with the fact that they were taking advantage of a special offer and they didn't like the normal perhaps rates that they applied once the airtime had been used up.
Duncan, let's have a look at the whole sector now. When I say the whole sector, of course, are the only two we can really play. I mean, I'm taking Telkom out of this for the purposes of this discussion, but you have a look at MTN, you have a look at Vodacom. Given what you've just said about the increasing competition, the saturation in the South African market and the shrinking margins, the margin compression, maybe both of those companies are overvalued and they need a bit of a re-rating, or will they be able to reinvent themselves in some way and make everybody happy again?
Well, I think MTN is a very different story to Vodacom. You know, about 85% of Vodacom's revenues are from the South African market, whereas MTN is very much an internationalized operation. Nigeria is the biggest operation, not South Africa. So I think they're different growth stories. So I don't think you can compare them directly, but certainly competition is increasing in the South African market. I think Telkom with ATA has probably got the toughest job of all of these guys as the fourth mobile entrant and having to come up with products and services in a space that's become a lot more competitive since Alan McCraig took over the CEO job at Cell C. But I think they're also playing quite a smart game and they're focusing on broadband. They've got access to a big chunk of spectrum, which gives them a huge competitive advantage for delivering next generation 4G LTE services over their rival operators in the South African market. So they've got opportunities as well. But yeah, I think MTN and Vodacom are quite different stories, actually.
In fact, MTN entrenching itself even further within that international arena today, announcing that it's increased its stake to 100% shareholding of the Cyprus operations. I mean, what have you made of that move specifically, and what that now brings to the MTN stable?
Well, so I think Cyprus is a tiny operation in the context of the MTN group, so I wouldn't read too much into the impact of that deal. But certainly, I think with the Lord Hoffman investigation having been concluded, we've seen a movement up in Telkom's share price. I think there's quite a bit of positivity around the company now, and I see there has been some speculation in the media in the last week or two that MTN may in fact be looking at further acquisitions and opportunities in the Southeast Asian market. So we could in fact see the group CEO Sifiso Debengwa making some moves to expand the 21 territories in which MTN currently operates. The talk is that they may be looking at a license in Myanmar. What about the other way? You're talking about MTN going to Southeast Asia. What about other companies and other big companies worldwide coming into South Africa, Southern Africa, and using South Africa as a base for the rest of the continent? Is that likely? Bharti Airtel, we've heard that story, but it's still an open playing field, isn't it? And it's still a very, very lucrative market, Africa. Can it happen? It can happen. It can very definitely happen, and we've seen interest from big international operators. Bharti Airtel is a constant rumor. The other operator, which has just in the last couple of weeks announced its intentions to get into this market through a full mobile virtual network operator business, is France's Orange, which is owned by France Telecom. They're coming in on a sort of a cautious approach at the moment. They've been looking at this market. They've admitted they've been looking at this market for several years, and they've admitted they've been keen to buy assets here, but the market hasn't allowed them to do that. But they've certainly indicated that they're going to start to come into this market over the next couple of years, and that their intention is to launch a full-scale mobile virtual network operator once the regulatory environment is conducive to doing that.